Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Paul Hart, and I am looking forward to teaching the data analysis course starting late in August and running through October. And this is a presentation that's based on the presentation I did for your class a few weeks ago, as by way of doing a preview of what we're going to be talking about in my part of your course. So I wanted to record this to give you an opportunity to hear my voice and hear some of the explanations again about some of these methods of data analysis. This is going to be sort of a little review of some basic statistics, and then I'll also review a little bit about qualitative research and finish up by talking about triangulation. So, as you recall, I started out, and first of all of these different data analysis methods are driven by the research question that you ask. So, all of these ideas that you're going to be seeing in these PowerPoints are all going to be based on the different types of research questions. So, as you recall, I pointed out that with a highly rigorous controlled experiment where we can control all of the variables or a lot of the variables that go into doing a study, then we could ask a quantitative research question that uses wording like, how does the use of teaching methodology X or any other independent variable, how does the use of teaching methodology X affect student scores on the, and then once again, whatever assessment you're going to be using? Now notice I used the cause-effect language here. And I pointed out once again, and I'll point this out in a later slide, that you can only really ask these kinds of cause-effect questions when you are dealing with a highly rigorous controlled experiment. Otherwise, you need to use a different form of a question. With this type of question, where we're talking about a cause-effect kind of relationship, then we'd probably be using a correlation or a t-test. And with a correlation, we're looking at how two variables track against each other. So we'd have some teachers that were using teaching methodology X, and then we'd maybe have more teachers who were using teaching methodology X, and then we'd use maybe many teachers who are using teaching methodology X. That would be the one variable. And then the other variable would be the assessment scores of the students. And we'd see if those two lines track with each other. Another form of analysis would be a t-test. And there we would be looking at, is there a difference in scores between, say, before students were exposed to teaching methodology X, and then after they were exposed to teaching methodology X? And do we see a shift in performance pre and then post? Now, as I said a little bit earlier, if we are not doing a rigorously controlled study, then we would be better off using a more neutral kind of phrasing, which is, what is the relationship between the use of teaching methodology X and student performance on whatever assessment you're going to be using? Notice the use of the phrase or term relationship. We're not pinning this down to a cause-effect relationship. We're simply asking, what is the relationship? And once again, we might use the similar kinds of analysis methods, correlation or a t-test. Now, if you are going to be asking research questions for an analysis of two or more variables, usually 3 variables or more, then we ask a question such as, what is the relationship between A and B and C? And these are all, I believe, independent variables. And so we would be looking at these three different variables. My experience with using an ANOVA was to look at the perceptions of supervisors by three different groups of people in their work organizations: their employees, the supervisors themselves, and the supervisors' managers. And so I did an analysis of variance to see how closely, how much agreement there was in the perceptions of the jobs that these supervisors were doing between their employees, the supervisors themselves, and the managers of the employees. So I was looking at an analysis of these three variables, and in that case we would use the ANOVA. A research question for an analysis of many variables. So here we could be looking at what's the relationship between A and B, what's the relationship between B and C, and what is the relationship between A and C. We would be looking at a MANOVA. And as you can see here, I've put in a link to a website that explains how a MANOVA works. Now, for qualitative research, we're not looking at relationships between variables. We're simply looking at what's going on in the environment. And these are typical kinds of qualitative research questions. What happens to teacher morale when a new teaching method is introduced? Now here, you could very well do interviews with teachers to find out what their feelings were. Are they enthusiastic? Are they motivated? Are they depressed? Are they unhappy? Are they resistant to the change? It could be a wide variety of things that could be learned through the qualitative research questions. But this would be an example of a qualitative research question. Another example of a qualitative research question would be, how do teachers perceive a teaching intervention as a tool for teaching literacy skills? So here we're trying to get at teacher perceptions, and perceptions are a very common source of looking at qualitative data, and that's what we would be looking at in this research question. The third research question is, what are the forms of resistance encountered by staff development professionals when trying to introduce a new teaching method? So here, once again, we're getting at things like perception, what are the internal feelings of the people, staff development professionals, for instance, when they're trying to introduce a new teaching method. So here, these would be qualitative research questions, and these would be questions that would be used in a qualitative study. And then finally, there is triangulation. And as you might recall from my presentation, triangulation is the idea that there are two or more sources of data, and these sources of data can overlap. Each of the sources of data can give us a certain type of data about the phenomena that we're observing in the organization. And then these data sources can overlap, so that we see that there is some agreement between data source 1, data source 2, and data source 3. And this we call triangulation. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to suggest three different sources of data: interviews, surveys, and observation. And then these can also overlap. And then we have what's called triangulation. So we can come up with some more valid, truthful kinds of conclusions by triangulating these different sources of data. And that can also be another form of qualitative data analysis. So I hope that this information has been helpful to you, to give you a little bit of an insight into how to analyze the data for a qualitative or a quantitative study. And this will be a good preview of what we're going to be talking about late in August and going into as far as October of this year. So I hope this information is helpful to you, and let me know if there are questions or support that you need after you view this presentation. Thank you.